Aloha and welcome to Ehana Kako. We're here every week on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'm Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroots Institute. One of the things we do at the Institute is analyze policies that are being developed by our legislators and other government officials, particularly for the economic impact that they'll have. Sometimes that economic impact is as simple as dollars and cents, but more often the impact is far greater, especially when we look at certain principles that come from not just economic measurement, but economic philosophy. And today I've got an economic philosopher, chair of the economics or the philosophy of economics department at West Liberty, who's also a scholar for the Grassroots Institute. His work has been featured here in various media in the state of Hawaii as we've worked with him to help our policymakers and the public here in Hawaii understand the philosophy behind economics. Please welcome to the program today from Chicago, Erik Root. Erik, aloha to you.
Hey, how you doing? It's good to be here today.
Well, it's always good to have you on the program, and thanks for all the work you do for the Grassroots Institute in helping us to build a better economy here in Hawaii.
Oh, you're welcome. It's you guys are a vital part of Hawaii, and definitely a voice that's needed.
In fact, you have a personal relationship, don't you, to the islands?
Yeah, we have both my wife and I have family there, and I've had some family who's lived on Maui off and on, some there, some off, then back again, that type of thing. But then I have some friends on the Big Island as well, some really good friends of mine. So
that's great.
It's always been there's been always been a connection there for us.
One of the things I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about some of the work you've done for us here in Hawaii, and then more broadly talk about the whole concept of economic philosophy. But first, just to give our viewers a suggestion as to what we'll cover in the next couple of segments, how would you define economic philosophy? I mean, if you're the chair of an academic department that teaches economic philosophy, what exactly are you teaching?
Well, we're not teaching like strict economics per se. For example, if you have an economics class at a college, you're being, taught economic theory in terms of demand and supply and whatnot. We certainly do a lot of that, but we don't get into the really nitty-gritty math of it all. We spend more time speaking generally. Like, for example, there's a big difference between an economics professor who might teach some really technical aspect of economics using really heavy math in their class.
That's right.
And someone who teaches, say, Adam Smith's theory of moral sentiments, which talks about the sort of morality, if you will, behind freedom in the economy without all of the nitty-gritty technical economy of it all.
So the
So that's what
the analysis that you give to various policies is not just purely technical, which the economist would do. Instead, you kind of show us how to think about the economics of all of this, the philosophy behind the economics.
Yeah, I would call it thinking about it in terms of the big scheme of it, sort of the underpinning theory of it all.
Sure.
And then what the economists are really good at is giving us how does this actually work in the real world? And people say that theory and practice doesn't really match up, but in this sense, you do need both. You need a person who understands the theory underneath, and then you need the economist who tells us, how does this actually work in the real world?
Well, when we come back in a later segment, I look forward to talking with you about economic theory itself and the philosophy of economics as it applies locally and across the nation. But first, let's take a topic that is quite recent and one you have been consulting with the Grassroots Institute on, and that is the fact that we have started to convert our hospital system, the state hospital system, into the private sector in terms of the labor. Just overall, I mean, how common is that across the nation? Are there precedents for this?
Well, this not especially. There isn't. I think we're in a time of flux now. The economy is moving in such a way that at least from my perspective, at least what I've seen, I don't know really what's going to happen. The problem with Hawaii, at least in the past, has been that they've had these, as you probably know, and my piece was in the Maui News, I believe, they've had these horrible certificate of need laws that have sort of stood in the way of allowing some of these free market, free market things to work their way out, and initiatives to work
That's
themselves
right.
out.
In fact,
but to be honest with you, we're in the middle of a real flux, especially with the presidential election going on.
Right.
I have no idea what's.
Let me cue some of our viewers into the situation here and then ask for your comment upon that. The legislature, in its wisdom, and the governor passed a law last year, or the last legislative session, that actually allows Maui state hospitals, there are 3 of them there, to subcontract their labor out to the private sector. And this saves the hospital system because labor under the unions had come to 70% of the actual expenditures, which was just unsustainable. They were going bankrupt. Now, while that's a step forward, however, there's still many regulatory barriers. And you just mentioned one, and your work was featured in the Maui News recently, because you've helped give our state some wisdom about certificate of need laws and how they actually prevent the free market from providing the services and needs that are required. First of all, define the certificate of need and tell us how it applied to the hospital situation on Maui.
Well, they are meant to, certificate of need laws are con laws. They are meant to prohibit businesses from, really, I think, to prohibit businesses from entering the marketplace. So proponents, those people who support these laws, claim that they're are there to protect the citizens. But as a matter of practice, I think that's what I wrote. It's exactly the opposite. So essentially what a business must do, and it's not just in the healthcare services, it's within, it could be many different services, they have to file what they call a certificate of need to demonstrate that there is a need for them to exist in the community. And really, we could just stop right there and say that that is just outrageous on its face, because who's the best determiner of what business can survive or fail than the consumer themselves?
That's right.
But here what they're doing is they're applying essentially to a state agency or a state regulatory agency to ask them if they can basically exist. And what's even more outrageous on that point is that a competing business can step in and say that they aren't needed, thus carving out and maintaining more or less a monopoly for themselves.
So in the ideal free market world, you would have a need that's already there. Investors and business people would know that if they offered a hospital to meet that need, people would come and buy their services. It's as simple as that. And in fact, recently there was an attempt by 100 doctors, and who would know better than the doctors, in Keli'i on Maui, to set up a hospital. Tell us how that worked out in terms of the state government control with respect to the certificate of need.
You're talking about the Malulani, that center that got denied, or you're talking about the recent one? There is one that's been approved, from what I understand.
Right. Well, let's do the anatomy. Let's do an autopsy on the one that was denied.
Well, I think it was called the Malulani Project. They were shut down by their competitors, essentially, because they believed, or they feared, that this would be their competitors. They feared that the competition would cause them to lose business and profits. So the result of this was, and this would have been the Maui Medical Center, I believe, at the time, who complained that if Malulani was allowed to exist or compete with them, that it would have a detrimental impact on their hospital and hurt their bottom line. The person behind it, by the way, who I've just come to admire, I do not know him, I've never spoken to him, but Dr. Ronald Kwan was really, I would call him a free market humanitarian in many respects. He was behind all of that. But so anyway, Malulani was shut down essentially because the Maui Medical Center didn't want the competition.
So we see something that's quite contrary to free market principles, where competition is actually good. It gives the consumer more choices and so forth. I'm going to come back after a quick break, and we'll pick up on this story and some other stories. But thank you. Just hang on, Erik, and we'll have you back in just a moment. You're listening to and watching a program with Erik Root, who is a philosophical, economist, not only doing the work of economics, but helping people to think about better economic policy. We'll be right back on Ehana Kako on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network after this short break.
Hi, I'm Chris Leatham, and I'd like to invite you to come and watch my show every Wednesday at 3. I'm interested in a variety of issues that have to do with politics and our local business economy. And I'd like to bring on guests who like to talk about everything from technology to social media to what we can be doing to improve our environment. And so I'd like to invite you every Wednesday at 3 to stay and watch my show here with Think Tech Hawaii. And I'll see you there.
Aloha, my name is Reg Baker, and I'm the host of Business in Hawaii with Reg Baker. Business in Hawaii is a program that is positive stories about business in Hawaii. We're tired of hearing the negativity and why it's the wrong place to have a business. We talk about the positive reasons for having a business in Hawaii and how to be successful. We broadcast live every Thursday at 2 o'clock. We look forward to seeing you. Aloha.
Welcome back to Ehana Kako. Every week we're here on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network. At the Grassroots Institute, we love to say Ehana Kako. It sounds like a pule kako. Many people know that saying, which is let's pray together. We also say Ehana Kako. Let's work together. Let's work together for a better government, economy, and society. And think of the terrible alternative. If we don't work together, nothing gets done. And that's one reason we're so grateful for the partnership between Grassroots Institute and Think Tech Hawaii. And my hat goes off to Jay Fidel, the overall leader of the movement, and the many hardworking volunteers and staff that are here at Think Tech Hawaii. Now back to my guest. We have the opportunity today to talk with an economist who dwells upon the understanding of the role of various economic policies and their impact upon society, Erik Root. Erik, are you still there?
I am still here.
Great. I'm glad the internet is still up. Erik, we were just...
For a change.
Yes, we were talking a little bit about certificate of need laws here in the state of Hawaii. And in fact, you in your research have come across the fact that we're not ranked very well in terms of comparing states and the status of their certificate of need laws. And again, certificate of need laws with regard to hospitals basically require the hospitals to jump through all kinds of hoops in order to demonstrate that there's a need. How are we doing in Hawaii compared to the rest of the nation?
Well, anybody listening to this, or actually anybody at any time who has an internet connection can look this up. There was a study done by George Mason University, which is a university near Washington, D.C. And they have a center there called the Mercatus Center, and they ranked all the states in the union about how, I want to say pernicious, but the number, basically the sheer number of how many certificate of need laws they had. In this study at the Mercatus Center, Hawaii ranks third. So this would be one of the few times that you don't want to be in the top 10 ever. So Hawaii has a lot of certificate of need laws in place that block or actually prevent competition in the marketplace.
So Hawaii is third highest in the nation in terms of obstructive laws that interfere with the operating of the free market.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So when I started looking into Hawaii and this sort of problem, because I think it is a problem, then I started looking at the hospital situation that was going on in Maui and what happened with Malulani and what happened with them and why they couldn't, why they eventually ended up not existing.
Well, one of the problems you highlighted in the first segment today is that when that hospital system faced its challenge in terms of free market opportunities, a competitor was able to use the government in order to gain favor. Mm-hmm. So two things that we see here, and I'd like you to comment on both of them. We see a real strangling of healthy economic competition, which would have benefited the consumers, but we also see the government in a role of playing favorites.
That's right, and usually, now in this instance, it would be the State Health Planning and Development Agency, or the SHPDA in Hawaii, and they take into consideration, or at least in this instance, they only took into consideration the representatives from the competitor or the supposed competitor of Malulani at the time, which would have been the Maui Medical Center. So anyway, at the end of all of this is that Malulani was allowed to exist was not allowed to exist, and the medical center was allowed to exist. And that means and this probably gets into the economic theory we can talk about in the upcoming segment or the end of this segment, is that there would be no competition between the two. And without competition between the two, the one who's allowed to exist with the other one not in place allows all those inefficiencies to continue to run. In the end, who's hurt? Definitely the patient.
One of the problems here is the issue of who makes the choice. In a free market, it is supply and demand. It is the basic economics of the situation that makes the choice, and the best competitor wins. But when government has such powerful tools as highly complex certificate of need laws, it can interfere, and it can make the decision. What's wrong with government making the decision as opposed to free market competition, a decision as to which players ultimately succeed?
There's a long list to that, but I think the first one would be that inefficient businesses are allowed to exist. That is, businesses that aren't as good as they otherwise would be if there was competition are allowed to exist. Second is prices are higher. They're a lot higher than if there is competition. One way to think about this in terms of at least the health, this health issue on Maui is it's like this. Everybody goes out, now and then to a restaurant, right? And if there's a new restaurant, say, that opens up in your neighborhood, usually, you'll go to it, and then if you like it, you'll talk to your friends and you'd say, oh gosh, that was really great, we're going to go back. Or if you really hate it, you'll say to your friends, oh my gosh, I hate that place. That's really not good. The food is awful. And eventually, if the food really is awful, just by word of mouth and by the people making their choices freely, that place will go out of business. And in a sense, isn't that a good thing? Because the people choose themselves what to support and what not to support. So the good places survive. The bad places either adapt and get better, or they go out of business.
But a government-favored business or a government-subsidized business doesn't go out of business when it fails. In fact, quite frequently, it garners more of our tax dollars just to keep it floating, which is precisely what had been happening for decades with the entire state hospital system. The inefficiencies you talk about because there's no competition, and the skyrocketing prices as well, again, because there's no competition. A bad business model was being sustained by the government taxing the people more.
That's exactly right. And in the case of Maui, I think even with the recent one that's going up, what they're doing is, it's really great that Maui, and some of these other places are getting hospitals, but they're even deciding how far apart they can be and where they're located on the island or in a state or whatever. This thing can be, these things can be applied to anywhere. And in a sense, that still hurts the consumer because, and especially as a matter of convenience, what if another hospital or a competing business, to keep it more general, needs to be located more near a population center or whatever? That would be much better for the people or for the patient or for the consumer to have it located in a place that's more convenient than sort of far away, out of your way. Makes it even more difficult to get the care, in this case, that you need.
Now, we've been talking about a fairly local situation, not only a Hawaii state situation, but one on the island of Maui, which could be rather exotic sounding to some of our viewers outside of the state. But what we're talking about goes on across the world in multiple governments and across the United States within the United States. Do you have some other examples, perhaps some historic examples of how government involvement in terms of establishing businesses or protecting businesses has led to the kind of inefficiency you're talking about, as well as higher prices, and in the end, the consumer is not served, but the taxpayer is burdened?
Yeah, well, I have a little bit of a connection to Chicago, of course, and this doesn't have anything to do with hospitals or anything like that. It has more to do with education. It's the only thing on the top of my mind right now since you asked the question. In the state of Illinois, the new governor there, his last name is Browner. He is in a lock-dead battle with the state legislature there over, for among other things, education. The education system in Illinois, but especially in the city of Chicago, has been propped up by the taxpayers in that state for quite a long time. Now, the problem with all of that is that they have come to expect the, I want to say the bias, if you will, or the preferred taxpayer monies that they get from the state, which has allowed them to become sort of fat and bloated as, in terms of their budgets and whatnot, and also less responsive to the parents in the city. So you could, not just with certificate of need laws, but with almost everything, you can point to the government propping up any entity, say in this case education, usually leads to an inferior product. Now, if you take just one example in, say, North Carolina, where they were one of the first states in the nation to really proliferate, say, the charter school movement, you see that the schools there are far more competitive. And this is just one of many reasons, but it's just one reason why a lot of businesses look to the South and the Southeast, because the schools are really good. The government is sort of hands-off, or at least they allow competition to exist in terms of charter schools. And you have a much more educated populace.
Well, this is very similar to the situation in the state of Hawaii, where we actually have two systems for education. We've got a very large, centrally controlled public school education system, and we have a thriving industry of private schools at the same time. And the private schools are not helped by the government to any substantial level, and their survival depends upon their ability to compete in the marketplace. And regularly, small private schools go out of business and they're replaced by better competitors. And we have some of the finest private school education in the world and country here in Hawaii. But taking a look at our public school system, which is propped up by government subsidies, both at the state and federal level, we have a real dependency on going back to the taxpayer. In fact, and this is just a side note, we're currently involved in the 2016 legislative session. And one of the big bills is an omnibus bill put forth by the teachers union for all kinds of benefits, all kinds of costs, including air conditioning and curriculum and so forth. And their proposal is to fund that by raising the GE sales tax, which is combined in Hawaii, the GET tax, by a significant percentage, a quarter of the tax. And it's that kind of approach that is ultimately harmful. By the way, what do you think about the proposal to raise the GET in order to fund more money for the educational bureaucracy?
Well, that's a softball. It's not good. It does two things. Hawaii is interesting because it's already overtaxed. The citizens of Hawaii are already overtaxed for numerous reasons, many reasons. It's almost like a perfect storm over there in terms of taxation and pricing. But it's obviously going to be bad for them if they get the money from this new tax. The citizens are going to be burdened yet again. It's going to be more difficult to live, and they're going to prop up an inefficient or inferior business or product or service for the citizens of the state. So, there's lots of better ways to do these things, and it's a matter of allowing freedom to sort of innovate and percolate. And you'll never, human beings are very, very entrepreneurial and very innovative, and you never know what's going to come out of that.
Right. Eric,
go ahead.
When we come back from a quick break, what I'd like you to do is take our viewers through a very fast primer on free market economics, and we'll tap into your wisdom as a professor. So we'll be right back, folks, after this short message. Don't go away. You're watching E Hana Kako on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network. We'll be right back after this break.
Aloha, I'm Rachel Yergin with Aging with Grace. Please join us every Tuesday on thinktech.com.
Aloha, my name is Kirsten Baumgart-Turner, and I'm the host of Sustainable Hawaii at thinktechhawaii.com. We air live on the internet and also on Oceanic Channel 16. I'd invite you to come for a fresh new show every Tuesday from 12 to 1 o'clock. I try to bring on guests that give us a different viewpoint on aspects of sustainability in Hawaii, as well as trying to unpack some of the difficult concepts of measuring and achieving sustainability, particularly with regard to sustainable economic growth and prosperity in Hawaii. Please join us every Tuesday from 12 to 1 p.m. Mahalo, aloha.
Welcome back to today's closing segment of Ehana Kako on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I hope you've enjoyed listening to my conversation with Erik Root, a philosopher of economics, an economic philosopher, somebody who understands not only the mechanics of economics, but the way economic thinking can affect public policy. What I've asked Erik to do in this final segment is just brief us on what in the world free market economics is. And you know, there's a lot of misconception about that term free market. Usually when I mention it here in Hawaii, people think I'm talking about the swap meet, but in reality, we're not talking about cheap prices or giving anything away, nor are we talking about Gordon Gekko and cutting the safety net out of people in a survival of the fittest mode. We're talking about something that is anchored in affirming the very freedoms that we have in this nation. But Erik, I'm going to throw it back to you, just right at the start. What is the definition of free market economics? What are we talking about there?
Well, we're not talking about anarchy, that's for sure. That's the first thing. Although, you know, there are some people who believe that that's what it means. You know, usually what we're talking about is the freedom to act and innovate without harming another person. So, you know, I can't do something that harms another person's fortune or life. It's not something that is just willy-nilly. You know, you can do anything and you can conquer another person and take their livelihood away. The free market exists within a structure of laws. I mean, really, to be honest with you, the free market is essentially to be as free as possible within the bounds of the law that protects your fellow man. So I have as much freedom to innovate and produce things, widgets or whatever, as you do. And as long as I'm not, you know, violating your rights, you know, trying to take your life, your liberty or something like that, then we should have the freedom to sort of exist in society. Now, you know, the thing is that many people consider that sort of conservative today. But to be honest with you, that was always been considered a liberal. You know, that's why we really consider ourselves classical liberals, or I consider myself a liberal, because we believe not in divine right kings. We don't believe that anybody has the right to, you know, sort of enslave us, so to speak. But we have the freedom, or should have the freedom by right, to do what we want, to innovate, to pursue our own happiness, if you will.
That's right.
But not at the expense of not the expense of someone else's life or living.
You make a good point that free market thinking is actually liberal thinking in the classical sense of the term, in terms of freedom. Because really, in contrast, when we think of governments that haven't been free market, such as massive monarchies or the communist and socialist systems, such as the old Soviet Union, in which we had central planning for the entire economy. Remember the Goss plan that would determine that there could be 3,000 purple Yugo vehicles built in one city and sold and so forth.
Under those rules, we'd still be driving the Studebaker. Now,
there you
who
go.
wants
That's
to do
right.
That? Anybody? Nobody does.
So what we're really talking about is a freedom, a liberation, a liberalness away from a domineering, centrally controlled government. So
that's right.
That's one of the elements in free market. And in the free market, who determines the price of things? Who determines the availability and what gets produced and so forth? If it's not the government who has to tell people what can be produced at what prices and what can be subsidized and what is not, what works in the free market? How is that determined?
Well, it's determined by a number. Boy, that's a big question. It's determined by a number of things. It's determined by supply and demand, right? How much demand is there for the supply, and how much supply is there that is being demanded. But in term, none of this stuff is essentially. I know my economist friends would probably disagree with me, but a lot of this is just sort of worked out. Let's say I produce a widget, or some good, and I set the price too high. The consumer will tell me that by either not buying it, and so there may be a time when I innovate. I figure out how to make the device more cheaply, or I just lower my price, or whatever. And in that, what you call it, the invisible hand, right? The connection between the consumer and the business, or the marketplace and the products that are sold. These prices sort of work their way out, so to speak. And in that process, we get the cheapest price for the quality of the good. You know what I mean?
That's right. In terms of understanding the role of a central controlling government versus a freer market, sometimes what I like to do for my students is to line up some of the big thinkers in economics. And
Right.
way on the far left end, we'll put Karl Marx there, from
Right.
whom we get the communist and socialist systems. We keep moving, maybe put John Maynard Keynes, where we have the development of the central, the military-industrial complex. Then we move forward to Hayek and von Mises and Milton Friedman as we move toward freer markets and monetarism. Along this spectrum from left to right, where do you see the United States today?
Oh my goodness gracious, that's a good question. I think, I have good days and bad days, Keli'i.
Well, this kind of reminds me of the Saturday Night Live spoof on Bernie Sanders recently, where
That's right, the 1%.
he was asked the difference between socialism and democratic socialism.
Yeah.
And he said, it's huge.
Yeah, it's huge. I think we're more or less we're closer to Keynes than anybody. I mean, we've had, when Reagan was president, we had certain moments, if you will, or even when Nixon was president, a little bit, because Milton Friedman was in the Nixon White House. We had small glimpses of what you might call free market policy being sort of proposed and supported. But for the most part, we really are sort of near Keynes, I think, more than we're near the sort of the free market, sort of Hayekian end of things.
Sure. And when you talk about Keynes, John Maynard Keynes, what would be one or two of the key features of the vision that we attribute to Keynes? Not always his vision, but what we do attribute to Keynesianism.
Oh, the biggest thing that we attribute to Keynes is that the government must prop up the economy in some way. So if the economy is bad, we saw this after the crash in 2007, 2008, both in Bush and now, of course, Obama, when they said that in order to prop up the economy, we need to do one particular thing, and that is to infuse into the economy money, whether that means by government jobs or bank bailouts. And that sort of government infusion into the economy will prop up the economy, get it jump-started again, and then we'll just keep rolling down the road to prosperity eventually. The problem is, that's never really ever worked. I mean, if you look at what happened, especially if you read Amity Shlaes's wonderful book called The Forgotten Man, you'll find that all of those things never worked. They never worked at all. They made people feel good, I guess, in some way, but in terms of real economic progress, those things usually don't work. To be honest with you, I mean, the markets, regardless of our intervention, and even sometimes by our intervention, will rise and fall. And those things are normal in a way, that there needs to be some sort of cleaning out, if you will, of businesses that are bad, and the rise of businesses that are good. In the last 100 years, the Fortune 500 has changed dramatically. So it's not like a business sits up top forever. Apple is not going to be number one forever. As a matter of fact, I think they just dropped and they to number 2 or 3.
That's right.
But the market is
fluid, very fluid. And in the end, it's good, right? Because we have things like this. We have the iPhone. Who knows what's going to happen next?
That's right. And so by letting the market determine through supply and demand, we ultimately let the consumers benefit and choose. Let me ask you a question that is often raised as a criticism of the free markets, and that is that the free markets allow the big corporations to exercise great greed and control, and we're in a world in which a tinier and tinier percentage of those at the top are controlling a greater portion of the wealth and the economy, and therefore government should perform some kind of redistribution function, a Robin Hood function, so to speak.
Right.
What are your thoughts about that criticism of the free market?
Well, there's two things I would say about that. The first thing that I think needs to be said about especially businesses is that most people who believe in free markets are not necessarily pro-business. And what I mean by that is that people who believe in free markets don't believe that taxpayer money should go to business. They call it crony capitalism, giving businesses undue or unfair tax breaks, bailouts, taxpayer monies, that type of thing. That's the first thing. The second thing I would say is that if indeed that things need to be redistributed, I think is what you were alluding to, then and you need to sort of go after those corporations and whatnot who are going to be bad and evil anyway, then what you have is still, again, in a very real way, the government making the choice, choosing winners and losers in society, choosing which businesses will survive and which businesses will fail. I remember as a quick story, when I was talking with the former CEO of BB&T. He said, look, the Bank of America, this is not the first time they've been in trouble, and this is not the first time they've been bailed out. They have been bailed out before, and the reason why they keep acting badly, if you will, or taking unnecessary risk in banking terms, is because they know they're going to get bailed out again.
That's right.
So, so this is bad for us, right? It's bad for the taxpayer all the way around.
Last question as we've come to the end of our program, and I give you only 2 minutes for this.
Oh, thank you very much.
And that is, I'll ask the same question about the free market as you put your gaze upon Hawaii. You have researched issues here for us at the Grassroots Institute. You've gotten a taste of the way the economy works here. How free market is Hawaii? Where are we on that spectrum from socialism, communism, all the way through a purely free market?
I think Hawaii could do a lot better. Seriously, I really do believe they could do a lot better. One of the biggest things in Hawaii now is, of course, regulations, and especially in certificate of need. If those things would just go away, then on a health level and many other levels, Hawaii would be much better off. So in that sense, Hawaii is on the far left spectrum, if you will.
We talked about,
there's a general sense that they like sort of those regulations, but I think at least the people, but as long as Grassroots Institute in particular keeps voicing their concerns and whatnot, I think the people will really come around. They'll see the worth in freedom.
Well, thanks, Eric. Just really quickly too, we've had a lot of challenges to the rights of private property owners here in the state. Government interferes with that quite a bit. How does that impact our free economy?
Awfully, actually. really awfully. I mean, no matter what you're talking about in those terms, whether it's taxation or even I haven't looked into it for a while, but even if you're like condemning land for eminent domain, which usually goes to private businesses or somebody's, there's usually nefarious things involved in these matters, or for public transit or something like that, then to be honest with you, the taxpayers are going to be on the hook, especially if it's public transit, for billions of dollars that will likely never go away and serve very few people.
Well, Erik, thank you very much for your insights, and thank you for your service to us at the Grassroots here in Hawaii. I wish you the best and much aloha.
Thank you. Aloha.
My guest today has been Erik, an economist and political scientist at West Liberty University. He's affiliated with the Heartland Institute, another think tank, and he's a scholar at the Grassroots Institute. I hope you've enjoyed watching. This has been Ehana Kako, each week here, Mondays at 2 p.m. on the Think Tech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'm Keli'i Akina, saying aloha.
Hello, everybody. I'm IC Davidson. Thanks for tuning in to Think Tech Hawaii. One of the things that we do here, or the thing that we do here, is promote civic engagement in Hawaii. What does that mean? We want to talk about things that people want to hear about, and we want you to engage us and be part of that conversation. One of the ways that you can do that is by joining in during our live show via Twitter. How do you do that? Well, you get on the interwebs and get Twitter, get an account, and mention us if you have a question. What you'll do is you tune into our show live, tweet us questions, and our hosts and guests will address them accordingly. It's really easy, it's really fun, and I think that your participation in what we're doing here will help us continue the dialogue on very important issues that we're trying to cover. Sustainability, clean energy, you name it, we're on top of it. We want you to be part of what we're doing, because together we'll be able to make things change. Thank you for watching. Think Tech Hawaii, thinktechhawaii.com, weekdays 12 to 5 p.m.